London. Has your city recently been bombed into another dimension? Are buildings disappearing? Neighbors screaming? Government regulations changing every 6 minutes? Do you look outside and think, boy, this apocalypse sure feels financially underutilized? Well, good news. Introducing Billy Hill's Blackout Business Starter Kit, the official starter package for aspiring wartime entrepreneurs with absolutely no moral boundaries. Inside every package you'll receive: 1 suspicious trench coat, 2 forged petrol coupons, 1 fake ARP helmet, 3 cigarettes of highly questionable origin, a warehouse full of stolen bedsheets, and our exclusive How to Look Hopeful While Robbing People training guide. Simply shout, "Move along, citizens! I'm on official business," while stealing everything not nailed down. But wait! Order now and receive our Deluxe Soho Power Package. Includes a fake mustache, a loaded shiv, 3 terrified jewelers, and 1 complimentary enemy alien panic-induced business opportunity. Because when rival gangs disappear overnight, somebody's got to step up. Tired of small thinking? Tired of petty theft? Tired of asking, can crime become a corporation? Billy Hill says, absolutely. At Billy Hill Industries, we believe in violence, organization, employee retention, and excellent customer dissatisfaction. Side effects may include prison, razor injuries, postal robberies, sudden wealth, gang wars, police attention, enemy air raids, public outrage, and being described in Parliament as that absolute bastard. Do not use if you have morality. Not available in Sabini-controlled territories. Offer void where civilization exists. September 1940. While London burned, one man looked at chaos and saw opportunity. The Blitz Underworld. Hitler bombed London. Billy Hill robbed the ashes. Roll documentary. Disclaimer. Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary is intended for historical commentary, analysis, satire, and entertainment purposes only. We are discussing wartime Britain, organized crime, black markets, violence, looting, corruption, and the collapse of public order under extraordinary historical conditions. No statement in this documentary is intended to glorify criminal behavior. And let's be clear before anybody starts clutching pearls like they just found a stolen ham in a blackout pantry. This is history. Ugly history. Complicated history. The kind of history where governments panic, criminals adapt, civilians suffer, and some sharp-dressed lunatic with a knife in his pocket realizes bombs are bad for society, but great for business. So relax. Nobody here is giving career advice. Unless your career goal is don't be a wartime scumbag. In which case, beautiful, we support that. Now on with the show.
A Pizzaverse Studios production. In association with Palermo Productions. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Edited somewhere in Jersey after midnight. while somebody was drinking coffee strong enough to interrogate a witness. There's a way to make an entrance. Britain, World War II. As Nazi bombs rained down on London, a crime wave is taking place across the nation's capital. 1 million homes destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people turned into refugees. People living in shelters and subway stations, and it creates the perfect environment for criminality. Emerging from the city's smoldering ashes is a race for unprecedented control of the underworld. Suddenly, we had a character who was rising above a lot of the minor criminals in London. This was a guy who people were genuinely scared of. A new godfather is poised to seize power, and his reign will change the streets of London forever. Britain goes to war. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. The world is at war. As Hitler's armies begin their relentless march across Europe, they bring with them a new and fearsome tactic of war: terror bombing of civilian populations. The prospect of the German Luftwaffe darkening English skies is a major concern for the British government. Churchill himself had warned Parliament as early as 1934 that, in the event of war, the nation should expect an air assault on London that will drive millions of people into the open country outside the capital. The idea of terror bombing was that you would rain high explosive bombs or incendiaries on enemy population centers. It absolutely freaked the population out. The Committee on Imperial Defense estimates 600,000 dead, 1.2 million wounded if the Luftwaffe Blitz is London. When bombers came over a city, first of all, they couldn't be stopped. They were going to get through, and when they bombed, they were going to cause such cataclysmic damage that basically civilization would end. Akin to nuclear war today, the missiles will get here before we can react, and it will result in untold devastation. And the British are absolutely, appalled by their prospect. If you hit the London where they keep their government, then people are going to panic. Morale would collapse. There would be a revolution, and the government would be forced to surrender. But Britain is prepared for the Nazi assault. On the 10th of July 1940, the RAF takes to the skies to intercept the invading German Air Force. The Battle of Britain begins. The British Fire Command is much more resilient than the Nazis anticipate. Its ability to recover downed pilots, its ability to maintain its production of aircraft despite German bombing, its ability to weather the attacks on its airfields and still stay in the fight. After 2 months of this, Hitler, becoming desperate, wanting to have a victory over the British so he can turn his attention to the Soviet Union, then decides to shift to a bombing campaign. The Blitz. The Blitz begins. By September 1940, despite the early success in the Battle of Britain, the British government's worst fears are realized. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring orders the Luftwaffe to bomb English cities. The Blitz begins. The idea of the Blitz is that he's going to take out key industries, key facilities, key ports, and he's going to spread terror. Foreign London. The 7th of September 1940. There were 57 consecutive night attacks on them every single night. For the British people, the people underneath the bombs, this was suddenly something new. The Battle of Britain taking place in the air by their heads in southern England, they'd seen it, but now suddenly they were being targeted. Some people would be sheltering in Anderson shelters, which were little personal shelters you had in your back garden, where just you and your family would be in it. Some people were sheltering in the London Underground. Interestingly, the government didn't really want people to shelter in the underground. They tried to keep people out of the underground at first. Sounds extraordinary now, but genuinely they were worried that sort of underground troglodyte communities of antisocial people and antisocial behavior would develop. Fearing chaos on the streets of London, the British government executes its plan for the outbreak of war. Alongside the blackout, in order that all lights be extinguished after nightfall, it introduces a series of strict regulations designed to maintain social order in the face of unremitting bombing. A whole raft of defense regulations were brought in, covering things like the blackout, covering things like people's behavior, where they could and could not go. Defeatism became illegal. People who moaned about the war ran the risk of being reported and even imprisoned. So it became very much a police state. Of all the ironies, we were fighting a police state, Nazi Germany, and yet, to an extent, we had to create one. Some people were absolutely terrified of what was going on. People who were affected personally, people who were bombed out themselves, or people who knew people who were hurt, obviously had a horrifying time. For others, and you know this may seem a little surprising, the Blitz was a very liberating time. And the first to feel liberated by the Blitz are London's criminals. Enter Billy Hill. At the outbreak of war, a general amnesty empties the prisons, putting some of the city's toughest gangsters back on the streets. Among them is Billy Hill, 28 years old and already a notorious thief. While a nation gripped with fear prepares for German bombs, Hill sees an opportunity. Billy Hill came from a criminal family. There are such families in Britain as there are in any country. His father was a thief. His mother was a fence receiver of stolen goods. His sister Maggie was the best of them all. She was known as the Queen of the Baby Elephants. It was a wholly women shoplifting gang, cleared out store after store up and down the countryside, and he'd been brought up with the great criminals of the day. For example, Eddie Guerin, a high class in his time robber who escaped from Devil's Island and was said to have eaten his companions to survive. He was a friend of the family. So was Alice Darman, who was another of the 40 thieves. Born William Charles Hill on the 13th of December 1911, Billy grows up as part of a large family of Irish immigrants in the Seven Dials area of London's West End. A criminal slum, really. It was a series of rabbit warrens with very poor living conditions. Now Billy was one of 21 kids. They weren't all bent, but he was. He carried on his parental tradition. Him was poverty, and of course poverty bred crime, and in order to survive you had to commit crimes, even if you were 10 years old. He was a grocery delivery boy from the age of 9, and he carried out various petty thefts from that age too, so he became a small-time crook. During his teens, Billy Hill was in and out of juvenile detention centers for a variety of minor crimes. In those juvenile detention centers, he met other kids who were professional criminals, who were already steeped in crime, and really, that was his education. A natural leader by the 1930s, Hill had established his own gang in the North London borough of Camden. The gang's criminal activities draw them into turf wars with other local outfits, and as they emerge victorious, Hill becomes feared as a cold and violent adversary. These guys were pretty adept at burglaries, robbing bank employees, but there was something extra chilling about Billy Hill. Hill used to leave a V mark on the face of a lot of his victims. He would do this with what's known as a chiv, which is a very narrow, sharp knife. But he was careful not to murder anybody. He used to say murder's a mug's game, and he always used to slash down with his razor rather than up. Up runs the risk of cutting an artery. Down does not. He later called it good public relations. What he meant was he could scare his enemies as well as scaring his victims. As a daring thief, Hill pioneers a series of techniques that transform crime in London and bring an unstoppable wave of lawlessness to the capital. First among them is an explosive new type of motorized jewel heist, the Smash and Grab Raid. The Smash and Grab King. Smash and grab robberies were becoming very prevalent at this time. They were literally as they sounded. You'd smash the window of a shop, dip your hand in, and pull out as much jewelry and watches as you could lay your hands on before the police turned up. They were very dramatic. Hill often used open-top cars so that getting in and out was even quicker. You simply jump in. You simply jump out. On other occasions, he used his gang members posing as detectives who would go into jeweler shops and warn those jewelers about the risk of smash and grab raids, and they really must be alert, and what kind of safety techniques did they have? And Hill was able to capitalize on that too. Gang committed so many smash and grabs that the newspapers called it a crime wave, and the publicity from it became bigger and bigger. On each and every smash and grab he committed were just day after day headlines. Jewels stolen, first stolen, and so forth. And indeed, the Home Secretary made a statement in the House of Commons that this was going to be stopped. Suddenly, we had a character who was rising above a lot of the minor criminals in London, and this was a guy who people were genuinely scared of. And for Billy Hill, the outbreak of war in 1939 is the perfect setting in which to launch an all-out assault on London's underworld. The old gangs fall. And during the years between the two world wars, a fierce battle rages in the underworld as various neighborhood gangs vie with the Sabinis for control of both the racetracks and the lucrative rackets of Soho. The Cortesi brothers, Enrico and Augustus, were at one time part of the Sabinis, but they fell out. They wanted a bigger share of take, and there was a fight in the Fratellanza Club, which was down in Clerkenwell, in which Harry Boy Sabini was shot, and Darby Sabini had the ignominy of having his false teeth broken. Some people called the whites also now wanted a share of the profits, and throughout the 1920s, the late 1920s, there were a series of battles in and around Soho, culminating in 1927 with one called the Battle of Ham Yard. An agreement was made. The whites would have control King's Cross. The Sabinis would control Clerkenwell still, and people called the Elephant Boys, who came to the Elephant and Castle, would have a look-in at any rate, at the very least, and look in on Soho. But when Britain mobilizes for war, everything changes for Soho and London's gangs. The introduction of national defense regulations and fear for social stability sees the police launch a crackdown on organized crime. Racetracks are closed, rackets broken up, and the old criminal empires begin to collapse. The attitude to the underworld from the police was kind of to look the other way a lot of the time. Once the war started, interestingly, even though the police were so busy elsewhere, even though the police lost a lot of its manpower to the army, the police actually started to clamp down on organized crime in Soho. And that clamp down coincided with the Sabini family basically being neutered. In June 1940, events in the war throw London's organized crime syndicates into total disarray. Italy entered the war in that month. A very large number of Britain's Italian population were interned. These people suddenly became enemy aliens, and the effect this had on, for example, the Sabini family, was that they were taken out of circulation. Suddenly, they lost their business. So there was a kind of power struggle in Soho to take the place the vacuum Sabinas had left. This worked out very well for Billy Hill and his cohorts because suddenly the crime that the Italians had been specializing in was free for them. With the Sabinis neutralized, the chaos of the war has put Billy Hill in a position to launch a violent takeover of the Soho clubs. And as law and order starts to break down under the terror of Hitler's bombs, his campaign of robbery, heists, and racketeering is poised to change the nature of crime forever. The blackout becomes a criminal paradise. September the 7th, 1940. The Blitz commences. London is pounded for 57 consecutive nights as Hitler aims to batter Britain into submission. Nearly 1,000 German aircraft fill the skies. By mid-November, they have dropped 12,000 tons of high explosives and 1 million incendiary bombs. On December the 29th, the Luftwaffe drops over 24,000 high explosive and 100,000 incendiary bombs in a single night, creating firestorms that burn at 1,000 degrees Celsius. No lights are permitted after sunset, and beneath the crack of anti-aircraft fire and rumble of falling bombs, crime surges on the city's blacked-out streets. Violence and robbery is widespread. A mysterious killer is prowling the famous West End, and public order threatens to collapse under the campaign of Nazi terror. We've got 1 million homes destroyed in London. You've got hundreds of thousands of people turned into refugees. You've got people living in shelters and subway stations and that sort of thing. It creates the perfect environment for criminality. This was the opportunity, a golden opportunity, to make money. Not only do we have a blackout in which people could be robbed in the street, they could be cost, prostitutes could ply their trade relatively safely, but you've got the idea that you can steal. Theft increased, and theft increased enormously. Theft is always the most common crime in any country at any time, and the war made it possible because of the situation. One of the largest increases in crime at this time was from looting, and looting was very much an opportunistic crime. One minute the house was there. The next minute it wasn't. And people who would never normally commit crimes would be tempted to take something by the side of the road or out of a shop window. Even the emergency services, for example, the auxiliary fire service, or the heavy rescue people who are meant to be helping these people, were taking advantage of the situation to get things for themselves. You know, they keep a watch out for police and then will just take things for themselves, and this just is happening all the time. There's also a darker side to crime in the blackout, and that's it. Bombed-out buildings are a great place to dispose of bodies. We even have some examples, as grim as it sounds, of people helping themselves to valuables like jewelry and watches on corpses. Foreign. The black market takes over. The effect of these conditions on public morale is profound. The blackout and the upsurge in crime that it brings proves to be one of Hitler's greatest weapons in his quest to break British resolve. Imagine for 6 years having to live behind blackout curtains with very limited light. It essentially drives humanity underground in a way, and it really crimps social life. When Britons reflected back on the war, more of them complained of the blackout and complained of rationing. It was quite frightening not to know where you were going. You'd lose a sense of sort of stability, but also a sense of fear because you didn't know what was happening around you. It could be crime happening around you. If you're a woman walking on your own, it could be a man coming up behind you. Just didn't know. You were scared of noises, but all sorts of insecurities that came into play that, when there were street lights around, you just didn't even consider. In an effort to crack down on lawlessness and disorder, the government introduces a set of defense regulations that make many normal activities crimes. Hundreds of previously law-abiding citizens are caught up in a legal system where the lines between criminal and good citizen have been blurred. I spoke to a woman whose mother became a criminal when she went into a butcher's and bought an unweighed chicken. You weren't allowed to drive a light-colored car, presumably because that could be seen from above. You weren't allowed to have car radio because that could be a transmitter used by spies. So all sorts of areas of society was suddenly, literally overnight, affected by laws that people didn't know had been brought in. So people were suddenly caught out. People became criminals just like that. As everyday behavior suddenly becomes illegal, public respect for the law begins to break down. Together with the scarcity of consumer goods, this change in attitude gives rise to a huge nationwide criminal enterprise in which almost everyone participates. The black market. Its trade in peacetime or easily obtainable, but with the war suddenly become very, very scarce. Soap, babies' bottles, alarm clocks, decent whiskey. Alongside that, of course, were the food shortages because of the result of rationing. People would be quite prepared to do deals to get a few extra eggs for the family. There are stories that they were quite prepared to offer sexual favors to the butchers to get an extra cut of meat. The black market was seen as part of the victimless crime situation. The government has caused the problem. The government has clamped down. There is a kind of remiss feeling. The spivs. There's a wartime stereotype of a Cockney spiv. This person basically tended to look quite slick. He's quite well dressed, perhaps a slick mustache, and he's got a pattern the way he speaks. Yes, man, and we like a bit of this. We'd like a bit of that. This spiv is the man who can get you more, and he's your friend because he can help you out. They sold goods on street corners, keeping a weather eye out for the local patrolling policeman, the Bobby. And if you knew the right person, you could obtain almost anything on that black market. It made some people an absolute fortune. People who didn't think of themselves at all as criminals were quite happily dabble. That was always the word. Dabble in the black market. Have a bit here, have a bit extra there. There's no harm in it. The trouble was there was no harm in their end, but once you get up to the other end where there are armed robberies going on, they certainly wouldn't want to be associated with that violent end. For Billy Hill, the black market becomes the perfect foundation on which to build an empire. At first, like a lot of professional criminals, Billy Hill wasn't impressed by the black market. He regarded it as being small fry, too small scale, not worth his trouble. Then, of course, he realized very quickly that it was actually extremely lucrative. As the public demand for everyday items increases, Hill plans a spree of bold robberies to secure goods with which to feed and expand the market. Billy Hill said the blackout was Hitler's gift to the criminal world. The effect of the black market was to provide a whole new form of crime. Fur coats and jewelry, which are the kind of things he deceived before the war, are one thing. Now people needed cigarettes and whiskey and meat. It was a great, warm, welcome embrace that he walked into. He said, "I didn't just exploit the black market, I fed it." Typically, Billy Hill always thought big. He'd fill entire warehouses with things like sheets. Hill organized the forgery of petrol coupons. He organized a house in Hertfordshire to which stolen goods could be taken, formed documents for servicemen, for deserters who are on the run. He was able to harness all that and make it work. He has the system. He has the structure. He has a gang of heavies who can implement the crimes. They work for him. He was becoming boss of the Underworld, and he has got that team. Billy Hill's status was improving, as it were, year by year in the Underworld. He was becoming a major figure in London. There would be contacts with the rest of the country. By late 1940, Hill has a burgeoning empire of stolen goods, contraband, and forged documents. The money flowing in makes him one of Britain's most influential criminals. But Hill has even more ambitious plans. A series of high-stakes raids on an unlikely target. The post office. The post office robberies. During this period, post offices were being used almost like banks by many citizens, but of course they didn't have guards in the same way that banks had. Billy Hill noticed this, and he saw this as a potential criminal target. In a bid to become Britain's most powerful gangster, Billy Hill is poised to launch a crime wave across London. A crime wave that no one sees coming or will be able to prevent. Prior to the Second World War, London's underworld worked largely in the shadows of society, and as long as it remained out of public view, the authorities would look the other way. Policing in the 1930s was more concerned about protecting the public from violence than it was bothering about the gangs of petty criminals, as long as they didn't hurt the general public. The police themselves were incredibly lowly paid, so much so that most of them would be bought a pint of beer, which is another way of saying a bribe, and there was nothing wrong with it. But by 1940, as Nazi bombs rained down on the city, London gangster Billy Hill is remodeling and expanding the underworld. Having taken control of the lucrative wartime black market, he launches a new audacious type of crime: post office robbery. He began by raiding some of the warehouses and buildings belonging to the post office, which contained large amounts of cash. He then started hitting the vans that were taking amounts of cash from one post office to another, and this revolutionized the whole crime scene in London at that time. Billy regarded being a criminal as just like any other job. He himself said that the better you got at it, the harder you had to work at it. This new type of crime catches the security services completely lacking numbers and struggling to respond to the nightly emergencies caused by Nazi bombing. The police are helpless as Hill takes advantage of the war and oversees an avalanche of postal robberies, heists, and smash and grabs across London. In the war, you could enlist the public's support. For example, two people called ARP wardens who helped clear bomb damage and so on. Hill's men would have ARP helmets on and direct the public. Stand back. We're clearing. There's no need for you to come here, so stand away. While they just looted the premises. Mr. Big Time liked to do the big robberies, and he was committing and continued to commit these sort of crimes throughout the Second World War. At one stage, he even carried out a gold bullion robbery in Hatton Garden, claiming that he needed to get enough money together to support his family after he was going to be conscripted. But he actually never got conscripted, and the suspicion is that he paid someone off to avoid being conscripted. He was cautious. He planned things meticulously, and he had a kind of rapport not just with the public, but with the police too. He was always very careful to be deferential to them. In the case of Chief Superintendent Edward Greenough, he always called you Mr. Greenough, sir, and it was a kind of understanding which is rare, but it seemed to have worked in Billy Hill's favor. Billy Hill stood out as a criminal because he was so cool, so calm, so well organized, and he was a good leader of men. He looked after his teams. People would share and share alike. There'd always been a policy of looking after wives and children while their husbands were away, and Hill carried that out. He was a good leader. I mean, he was liked by his people. He paid his debts. He behaved, in criminal terms, he behaved very well. He was trustworthy. He ran his operation almost as if it was a corporation. He had a payroll and employees. He broke up fights. When members of his gang came out of jail, he would ensure there were clothes waiting for them and cash. By now, Hill is personally making around £400 per week, equivalent to £20,000 today, from the black market. On top of that, high-value jewel heists and postal robberies can net the gang roughly £500,000 or £600,000 in a single job. Hill begins to bait his underworld rivals, walking into their Soho clubs without permission, dressed in expensive tailored suits. Despite having a young wife at home, he is often seen in the company of mistresses, his trusty chiv hidden in his breast pocket and frequently used to maim anyone who objects to his presence. He was running more operations than anyone else, and his skill was at running these crimes simultaneously and getting away with all of them. Unlike the black market, organized crime on this scale is not perceived to be victimless. Hill starts to attract the attention of the press, public, and politicians as his notoriety grows. People were outraged by the type of crimes that Billy Hill was committing during the war because most men were away fighting for king and country, and here was this professional criminal flouting the law, smashing, grabbing, robbing, thieving, racketeering. And there was a feeling that it was outrageous that he would do such a thing when most people were away fighting and risking their life and limb. Increasing pressure is brought to bear on the gang, and in 1940, an unsuccessful robbery in London's jewelry district lands Billy Hill behind bars. By the time he is released towards the end of 1941, the worst of the German bombing campaign is over. The Soviet Union has entered the war, and Hitler has turned his military machine away from English skies and towards the vast expanses of the East. The change in the pattern of the conflict means nothing to Billy Hill. Britain remains at war, and he leaves prison ready to rebuild his criminal empire. Bigger, darker, more violent. He gets out in 1941, goes straight back into the underworld, and starts to commit the sort of crimes he was renowned for, but on an even bigger scale. The war was the making of Billy Hill. It enabled him to expand a range of contacts. It moved him into other fields of crime. It was a big criminal underworld in Manchester and indeed Liverpool, Leeds. Where there was money, there was crime. He was now probably the most influential criminal in the West End, and the West End has become a more violent, dangerous, and edgy place than it had been in the days before the war. All types of chancers, opportunists, and deserters flood into wartime Soho, swelling the ranks of the underworld and bringing the lore of the gun with them. There's an increased availability of guns simply because the number of servicemen and service personnel coming into London. As a result of the war, you had American and Canadian servicemen bringing guns in, but you've got other nationalities as well. There were over 20,000 deserters in London during the war. Those guys would have had weapons too. Deserters were people who had very little to lose. I mean, the authorities were already looking for them, and they couldn't get ordinary jobs, so they had to live on their wits. And that meant they were willing to take all kinds of criminal chances, and there were quite a surprising number of them. All these people entered the underworld. They increased it in size. They had so little to lose, they made it significantly more violent than it had been before. Reputation was all important to Billy Hill. Criminals wanted to join his gang. They could see how much money they were all making, and they could see the success ratio that Billy Hill was managing to attain. Yeah, okay, he did go to prison a few times, but overall he was getting away with probably 95 of the crimes that he and his gang committed. But in August 1942, his luck runs out again during a postal robbery in London. Hill's getaway vehicle is rammed by a nearby lorry, and he is returned to prison, this time with a 4-year sentence. Although his rapid rise has come to an abrupt halt, it won't be the last that the world will hear from Billy Hill. The King returns. 2 years after the Allied victory over Nazi Germany, having exploited the chaos of war to build a criminal empire, London gangster Billy Hill has spent the last few years languishing in prison. When he has returned to the streets, he finds the new modern underworld to be very different from the one he left. The villains became even more daring. They looked at bigger targets, places like Heathrow Airport. They would hit bigger post office vans. They'd hit bigger banks. After the war, the underworld became far more structured. The guys had been away in the military, were coming back fit and trained to behave in a certain way. Project Crime was going to become the name of the game because they were used to planning and organizing kind of masterminds. You could then carry off something like the Great Train Robbery in the 1960s because they're used to working in teams and units. The changes suit Billy Hill and his ambitions. His greatest asset remains his criminal mind, and he sees an opportunity to harness the strength of the post-war underworld and professionalize it. Previously, with the families like Sabinus, this was disorganized crime, whereas with Billy, what you're getting was the start of real organized crime. He moved on to a different level. He stepped back from being so overly involved in a lot of the crimes and robberies himself and became the managing director of crime. The guy who would supply the finance for the arranging of a crime, particularly robberies. Billy Hill emerged from the end of the war as the King of Soho, the King of London, the godfather of the underworld. And Soho becomes the center of post-war glamour. Servicemen returning from the war flood into its bars, clubs, and spieles, looking for a good time. And London's gangsters, most prominently Billy Hill, suddenly become fashionable. Remember that London of that period was very drought for most people. They were wearing old clothes, uniforms. But if you went to Soho, you would see the spivs with wider than regulation lapels, beautiful suits, chunky rings, big hats with a brim turned up, mustaches, pipes, or cigars, looking affluent. So you knew straight away that you were in an enormous, cinematically different place from the rest of London. Hill was a celebrity criminal. He referred to himself as the Humphrey Bogart of British crime. He didn't look unlike Bogart, and he had himself photographed in very expensive Savile Row suits. His wife wore very expensive furs, all of it stolen. Foreign. East Castle Street. By now, Hill is concentrating exclusively on high-stakes raids with huge rewards. In 1952, he carries out the East Castle Street robbery with a value of over £7 million today. It is the biggest criminal heist Britain has ever seen. The East Castle Street robbery, which was just off Oxford Street, was an attack on a post office. Brilliantly organized, one has to say. He rehearsed his men in the suburbs under the pretext of making a film. One realized then what a major player he was, because, apart from anything else, no one was arrested. It was done very carefully, almost like an army exercise. Everything was timed, and it became the precursor to other even bigger crimes, such as the Great Train Robbery, the Brinksmat Robbery, and other such pivotal robberies committed in Britain. The press are quick to describe large-scale robberies and heists overseen by Billy Hill and his new professional underworld as a crime wave, and questions are raised in Parliament as to how to stop the tide of lawlessness. These concerns, however, are largely ignored by the British public, whose experience of war has changed their perception of crime forever. People realized after living through the experience of the Blitz, they couldn't suddenly expect the government to look after them, or the church, or their local MP. So everybody became a wee bit more lawless. People realized what they were capable of for the first time, that they would do anything to survive. Hill spends long stretches of the 1950s pursuing criminal opportunities overseas. He will eventually return to Britain to launch a ferocious turf war against his former partner, the East London gangster Jack Spot. By the 1960s, many of the prominent gangsters are household names, their activities followed eagerly by press and public alike. They owe it all to Billy Hill. What we had during the war were kids who had no fathers. There were no policemen about. The bomb sites were their playgrounds, and the whole criminal ethos was feeding off this. Some of the characters that Billy Hill mentored included the Cray twins, notorious London criminals who went on to run the Underworld 15 to 20 years later. Hitler failed, but crime evolved. But what of the Blitz? The Nazis' campaign of terror bombing that had allowed Hill to build his empire. Hitler had sent the Luftwaffe to break Britain, but for all the death and destruction, he failed. And against all the predictions of the military theorists, British resolve stood firm. There is a reaction that the Germans don't take into account. They assume that if you spread terror from the air, you will destroy the will of an enemy population. The opposite occurs, and not just in Britain. Imagine Pearl Harbor. Imagine 9/11. And you put the Blitz in that context. The actual attack on British soil creates this galvanizing, crystallizing effect where British society pulls together to reject this invader and reject this invader's terroristic methods. Aren't going to see the bombs and just collapse into some sort of anarchy and chaos. People did indeed pull together. People did withstand the bombing. People were tough. Despite the surge in crime, Britain's response to the Blitz is still remembered as one of the nation's proudest moments. An American observer perhaps best summed up the mood when he said, "By every test and measure I am able to apply, these people are staunched to the bone and won't quit. The British are stronger and in a better position than they were at the beginning. Foreign." So there it is. World War II. The Blitz. London under fire. A city bombed, blacked out, rationed, regulated, and pushed to the edge. And in the middle of all that, Billy Hill. A thief. A planner. A violent bastard with a chiv and a business model. The war didn't create crime. Crime was already there. But war gave it oxygen. The blackout gave it cover. The black market gave it customers. The collapse of the old gangs gave it territory. And Billy Hill, being the kind of guy who could look at a burning city and see a balance sheet, turned chaos into empire. That's the ugly thing about history. Heroes rise during disaster. But so do predators. And sometimes the predator wears a Savile Row suit, smiles for the cameras, and calls himself the Humphrey Bogart of British crime. Hitler failed to break Britain. But the Blitz changed Britain. It changed London. It changed crime. And from those bombed-out streets came a new kind of underworld. More organized. More ambitious. More corporate. And a hell of a lot harder to kill. Bill Hill looked at a city getting bombed nightly and somehow said, "I smell opportunity." Basically turned wartime chaos into a business seminar nobody asked for. Harry Boy Sabini, part of London's old guard of gangsters, spent years controlling rackets. Then history walked in and said, "Congratulations, now you're dealing with World War II." Darby Sabini ran pieces of London's underworld before wartime flipped the whole board over, built an empire, then watched history throw a chair through the window. Jack Spot, post-war gangster with a name that sounds like a guy who either runs a criminal empire or sells hot dogs near a train station. If you enjoyed this deep dive into wartime London, Billy Hill, the Blitz, and the criminal underworld that crawled out of the rubble, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what historical gangster, crime family, wartime racket, or underworld disaster I should cover next. Because here in the Pizzaverse, we don't just tell history. We drag it out of the alley, shake the cigarette ash off it, and ask what the hell really happened. To everybody watching, supporting, commenting, sharing, and riding with the Pizzaverse, thank you. Seriously. This channel is built by the people who show up. The ones who listen. The ones who love history, crime stories, sarcasm, old-school documentary energy, and the occasional verbal slap across the face when history starts acting stupid. We appreciate every one of you. The Pizzaverse keeps growing because of you. So from Bambi Palermo, Vincent DiPrio, Pizzaverse Studios, and Palermo Productions, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the work. Thank you for keeping the stories alive. And remember, this is the Pizzaverse. We don't rewrite history, we excavate it. See you at the next one. Every family has a name. Every neighborhood has stories. And every city has ghosts. But some families inherit something heavier. Not money. Not businesses. Not old recipes. Questions. The kind of questions that stay alive for decades. Questions about old photographs. Old streets. Old funerals. And people who never came home. Joseph Pastor Jr. didn't grow up reading mob stories. He grew up inside the echoes of one. Because family history isn't always simple. Sometimes it leads back to names written in old headlines. Names tied to Brooklyn. Names tied to violence. Names tied to a world that rarely gave second chances. And among those names was Joseph Dudu Pastore, a murdered mobster and cousin of Joseph Pastore Jr. Not a movie character, not a script, not internet mythology. Family. Blood. Another branch on a family tree touched by the life and the cost that came with it. One uncle. 2 cousins murdered. Unanswered questions. And a family history still being pieced together. Some people inherit stories. Others inherit mysteries. Joseph Pastore Jr. Mob history. Family truth. Stories that never stopped talking. Subscribe now.
How'd that cross necklace get over your horns? You know the saying, I bet you be sweating like a whore in church, spending too much time trying to hide behind the Bible. Get in front of it, find out that Jesus was a foreigner. Virgin Mary, you would've deported her. Not before your husband found out she was a minor, he'd have ordered her. Him and his buddies would've recorded her, transported her, extorted her, and then sent her to the coroner. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. I'm pretty sure that God's annoyed of racists bringing him up. Sick of you chumps showing up to take a sip of the cup. You called the Aztec savages, but the cup, isn't it blood? Isn't the stuff symbolic? Oh, it's different, huh? Introduction to blood sacrifice. He died so you can't commit your crimes. Here's the hoping he come back to life. I can't wait to see the face on every single preacher's wife. All them secrets you've been keeping, tell me how you sleep at night. All them evil things you feeling, don't leave cause you be polite. Cause this even and the thieving ain't concealed as recondite. Only a few people know. And you know why they keep it tight. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. Weaponized all of it, don't know what a proverb is. Cherry picking Bible scripts, oh my God. Arrogance, lying in the Lord names ain't honoring. Pride leading the blind again, oh my God. You must be drunk off the blood of Christ. Or maybe you just back hitting the hooch again. Or back to cosplaying a hooligan. The grift, the cross to get the dollars, like what? Now you forgot where you and your hoochie been? You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't let your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians.